In February of 1931, a British woman named Julia Wallace was found dead on her living room floor, with several lacerations on the back of her head. But to this day, no suspect has ever been charged with her murder. In most cases, you should look no further than the spouse when investigating a murder, but as you will soon see, in this particular case, it is almost impossible to conclusively identify the culprit. Was Julia's husband, William Herbert Wallace, guilty of her murder? Let's see if we can find out. The mysterious murder of Julia Wallace. On the 28th of April 1861, Julia Wallace is born to parents William George Dennis and Anne Teresa Dennis, alongside her older sister Annie Maria. She lived with her family in Bruntcliffe House, which was a farm located in East Harsley, North Yorkshire. Now, before we dig too much into her background, I feel I must quickly highlight that this is now a case over 90 years old, so the information we have must be taken with a pinch of salt, such as the evidence that Julia at one time had faked her age and background. Julia once claimed that her father was a veterinarian surgeon and her mother, Amy Dennis, was a housewife of French origin. But it is heavily argued that Julia was in fact the daughter of a farming family. Her mother's true name was Anne, and she was 17 years older than she had led many to believe. Tragically, Julia Wallace was orphaned at just 14 years of age, and at the time of her marriage to William, she had just 3 surviving siblings: Rhoda, Amy, and William, her other 3 siblings having unfortunately died. On the evening of the 19th of January 1931, a phone call came in at a popular chess club in Liverpool, England. The caller was looking for a member named William Herbert Wallace. He hadn't arrived yet, but was expected, so a message was taken. The message was from an MrQualtrough, who asked for Wallace to come by to his house the following evening to discuss an insurance policy. Wallace was an insurance agent by profession. Qualtrough's message directed Wallace to an address on Menlove Gardens East, a street Wallace was very unfamiliar with. On the evening of the 20th, Wallace set out for the appointment, leaving his wife Julia at home. He headed out to Menlove Gardens West, where he knew and presumed Menlove Gardens East must connect to it. But when he arrived, he could find no such street. He wandered around, stopped to ask shopkeepers and a policeman, all of whom told him no such street existed. Puzzled, William Herbert Wallace journeyed back home. When Wallace arrived at his house at 29 Wolverton Street, Anfield, on the night of February the 20th, 1931, he used his key but found the front door bolted from the inside. He went around to the back door but found that door bolted too. There were no lights on in the house, so he began to worry and went around to try the front door again, but it was still inaccessible. Trying the back door a second time, he found that he could enter the house using the key. The door was no longer bolted. He turned on the lights as he made his way through the house. He eventually discovered the dead body of Julia Wallace in the sitting room. She had been bashed repeatedly by a blunt instrument, and there were around 4 lash marks on the back of her head. Shocked, William called a neighbour, who went off to summon the police. The police arrived and found very few clues, although a fireplace poker and a metal bar were missing. The police felt that these were the murder weapons and had been taken away by the killer. A small amount of money had been taken, but robbery was officially ruled out as the primary motive, as there just wasn't enough of it. William Wallace was consequently arrested 2 weeks later. William Herbert Wallace, aged 52, lived in the Anfield area of Liverpool, England, and was an insurance salesman working for the Prudential Insurance Company. On January the 19th, 1931, William went out to a meeting of the Liverpool Chess Club. A senior member of the club approached William during the evening. He told William that the club had received a phone call and that a message for William had been taken. The note stated that a Mr. MrQualtrough wished to purchase an insurance policy. William was invited to visit Qualtrough's home the following evening in order to complete the sale. The next evening, William left his wife Julia to go meet Qualtrough at his home. But as explained earlier, William encountered a problem, as the address he was given didn't seem to exist. William put this down to a possible error from the person taking the note, so he continued in his search for the Qualtrough residence. During the initial phases of the investigation, Wallace's behaviour raised a few eyebrows. During the inquiry and subsequent trial, Wallace seemed detached and monotone, if not cold, while detailing the events around the horrible murder of a loved one. He took the stand and failed to impress the jury. The jury did not like the man or his manner, which could have been either stoicism or callousness. They did not understand his lack of expression of any kind, and they knew it hid something. It could have hidden sorrow or guilt, and they made their choice. The court initially found Wallace guilty and sentenced him to hang. However, the Court of Appeals spared and released him. They felt the verdict did not quite match the purely circumstantial evidence. The police were convinced that it would have been impossible for Wallace to murder his wife and still have time to arrive at the spot where he boarded his tram to meet this mysterious caller. A fit young detective sprinted all the way to the tram stop, which showed that this was something an ailing 52-year-old Wallace probably could not have accomplished. The original assessment of the time of death, around 8 p.m, was also later changed to just after 6 p.m. But a milk boy witness who claimed to have spoken to Mrs. Wallace on her doorstep sometime after 6:30 p.m. further undermined the prosecution case. This therefore left Wallace with an extremely narrow window in which he could possibly have committed the crime, yet emerge blood-free and composed only minutes later to catch his tram. Also, Wallace's suit, which he had been wearing on the night of the murder, was examined closely, but no trace of bloodstains were ever found. The first theory that I'd like to discuss is that of Richard Gordon Parry. The Julia Wallace murder case sat for almost 50 years, but finally in 1980 a radio programme about the case pointed the finger at a co-worker of Wallace's as the killer. According to the story, Richard Gordon Parry, who had an alibi of being with his girlfriend on the evening in question, appeared at a garage the day after the murder took place, needing his car completely cleaned, inside and out. The garage attendant noticed blood-soaked gloves inside the car. However, there doesn't seem to be any further evidence against him, which makes it difficult to say without question he is guilty. Also, the fact his girlfriend provided an alibi makes it a shaky theory in my opinion. But then again, it wouldn't be the first time that somebody has lied for their partner. The second theory I believe is more plausible. A famous crime story writer, P.D. James, declared with absolute conviction that she was able to identify the killer. James was quoted as saying, "The prosecution relied on the theory that Wallace made the call himself in a premeditated bid to establish an alibi, but this theory was quashed." Richard Gordon Parry, a 22-year-old local who was also a suspect in the inquiry, had made a prank call to Wallace, sending him on a wild goose chase in retaliation for Wallace causing Parry to lose his job. P.D. James believes that Wallace was in fact guilty as charged. She thinks the case became muddled because no rational person could possibly believe the coincidence that Wallace had decided to murder his wife on the exact same evening that a prankster had conveniently lured him from his home and provided him with an alibi. Parry never admitted making the call, but perhaps this was out of fear of bringing suspicion on himself. So unfortunately, this theory will be almost impossible to verify, but interesting nonetheless. Now this theory is a little bit more out there, but looking at the evidence, I'd say it's still a strong theory nonetheless. A few years ago, a Redditor ironically named MrQualtrough provided an excellent, well-thought-out theory that concluded a long-time friend of William Wallace's, named James Caird, is to blame. Caird and William had initially formed the chess club together, and at the time of the murder, they had known each other for about 15 or 16 years. Caird knew Wallace's home very well, as he had been to the home many times to play games of chess. With little doubt, these games would have been played in the kitchen due to the need for a table, and thus in the same room as the cash box had always been kept. This could be the potential motive for James Caird, as he would know where to find William's cash. To further back up this theory, Caird knew Julia for many years and was listed as one of the people Julia would admit into the house without hesitation. James Caird also lived less than 30 seconds away from Wallace's house, which would have meant he could have easily got away. The only issue with this theory, however, is that if the murder was premeditated, how could James Caird guarantee that William would get that message? Well, this Redditor would argue, on the day of the phone call, James Caird was at the club even though he was not scheduled to play a match that day, since his chess nights were only on Thursdays. It was also said that Caird prompted Beattie, the fellow chess club member who answered the phone, to pass the telephone message on to Wallace. Caird also followed Beattie when he answered that initial telephone call, and apparently he stood there while the message was delivered to William Wallace. So although it's still quite a stretch to lie the entire hopes of a plan on William choosing to act on that phone message, Caird could have easily held off the plans if William chose not to act on it. Again, as he was good friends with the family, turning up at the residence unannounced wouldn't have raised any flags. There are many other theories out there, but to prevent this video from going on forever, I decided to just lay out the more plausible ones for you today. Like I mentioned at the start of the video, the spouse is always suspect number one in any murder case. So in my opinion, with this mystery having so many red herrings and pitfalls, it leads me to lean towards the most plausible answer, which in my view, would be that William Wallace is the killer. The time of death is shaky, so it's difficult to say whether or not he would have had time to kill his wife, clean up, and then rush off for his meeting. Also, it seems to me that Wallace's innocence depends on the word of a milk boy who claimed to see Julia at 6:30. So although I'm certainly still unsure of what really happened to Julia, if I had to give an answer, the killer would have to be William Wallace. Nevertheless, I'm keen to hear your opinions, so please make sure to leave a comment down below. And also let me know if there are any other cases you would like to see us cover in the future. But until then, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.